Hi there. In this video, I want to talk about rate of change and the introduction to slope. So a rate of change is comparing two quantities using division. So some real-world examples of this would be miles per hour. Okay, this would be the cost per pound. This would be your hourly rate of pay, so pay per hour, okay? And so one thing that I want you to understand is that we're comparing two quantities, all right? And so whenever we talk in terms of miles per hour, cost per pound, pay per hour, the word per indicates that you're using a rate of change. Okay, so we've talked about this in the last section about calculating the rates of change and using the points to do that. But what I want to do is relate these concept of rate of change to slope. Okay, and what we talk about when we talk about slope is we use a bunch of different terms. We use the term rise over run. Okay, we use the change in y divided by the change in x. We also use the change of the independent variable divided by the change of the dependent variable. Okay, these all mean slope. Okay, and really slope is a measure of steepness. All right, measure of steepness. So the next thing I want to do is actually calculate the slope, okay? So we can do that a number of ways. It depends what you're given. If you're given a graph, we can look at the graph to determine what the slope is. We can look at table values to determine the slope, and we can use points. So let's calculate the slope of this line, okay? And what we're going to do is measure the steepness of this line. Now, given a graph, what I always do is I use the term rise over run. And another way to think of that is a stair step. So what I want to think about is how do I go from one point to the next, okay, using a rise over run, using a stair step. And so what I do is I start at one point, and I rise up, go vertical, and then I go horizontal until I get to my next point. And I do that repeatedly, okay? And what we can say here is that we rise up 2 units, okay? So my rise is 2, and then the number of units I go over is 1, 2, 3. So up 2 over 3, up 2 over 3. So in this case, the slope of this line is equal to 2/3. And I use the variable m to show my slope. Now, the next method that I could use to determine the slope is actually just by using the points, okay? Now, I'm going to work backwards to develop the slope formula, but let's think about what we already know. We know that the slope between these points is 2/3, okay? Where we rise up 2, go over 3. So when I draw this triangle here, where I go up 2 over 3, how do I use the y values to get 2, all right, to get my rise? And what you want to think about is the fact that 3 and 1, using these numbers to get 2, I would subtract. So what I would want to write here is that my slope is equal to 3 minus 1. So I'm going to write 3 minus 1, and then over, and then the other question is how do I use my x values to get 3? And I would do 4 minus 1. So in this case, I'm going to write, and I'm going to use 4 minus 1 here. Okay, so then, you know, I can just do the math. 3 minus 1 gives me 2. 4 minus 1 gives me 3. Okay, and so what we have is we have this formula here. All right, and so my formula is going to be given points. We'll call this x sub 1, comma y sub 1, and x sub 2 comma y sub 2, what I want to write is my slope can be found using y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. Now when I write this out, the 1 indicates that that's my first point. The 2 indicates that that's my second point. All right, and it really doesn't matter which point you choose, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you that I'm going to use this point here, -2, -1, and I'm going to use this point here. So I'm going to write down the points 4, 3, and -2, comma, -1. All right, I'm going to label this as x1, y1, x2, y2. And when I plug that into my slope formula, all right, I just follow what it says here. So y2 has the value of -1. So -1 minus the value of y sub 1, which is 3, over x sub 2, which is -2, and minus x sub 1, which is 4. So what I end up getting here is I get a slope of -1 minus 3 is going to give me a value of -4. -2 minus 4 gives me a value of -6. So now we didn't get 2/3 out of this. However, if we simplify this fraction, we'll get 2/3. So if I take a negative divided by a negative, that gives me a positive. So I have a positive 4/6. And each of these numbers is divisible by 2. Okay? And so as a result, 4 divided by 2 is 2, 6 divided by 2 is 3. And so I did end up getting a slope of 2/3. And so using points, you can use this however you want to get your slope, okay? Now, the last thing I want to talk about is using a table to calculate the slope. Now, one thing you can do is always turn these numbers into points and use your slope formula. Or you could simply just look at the table. Now, the one thing that I know is that my slope is going to equal 2/3. And what I'm looking for is also the change in y divided by the change in x. So what I look for when I look for change is what does my y value, what are these numbers, and these numbers are increasing, what are they increasing by? To get from -1 to 1, how much does that go up by? To get from 1 to 3, how much does that go up by? And the answer to that question is 2. All right, my y values are increasing by 2. All right, and then I want to do the same thing for x. What are my x values increasing by? Okay, and so my x values are increasing by a value of 3. And that's all I'm looking for, is what's my change in y, what are my changes in x, and I write that as a ratio, and that my slope is then equal to 2/3. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks a lot. Bye!